Boker Tov, Shabbat Shalom. Continuing on with the Halachot of Lashon Hara, we're beginning section number 3 of this book, classifications of Lashon Hara. So he explains that interpretation of information, Lashon Hara, most importantly to understand, now we get more into the details of it, Lashon Hara is often relative. This is important rule number 1 that pertains to Lashon Hara. And he explains, when classifying Lashon Hara and Rechilut, it is important to note that the area of forbidden speech is not like forbidden food, it's not like Machalot Asurot, or other prohibited activities which are absolute. We know that in foods it's absolute. Is this kosher or not? With Shabbat, is this asur or is it not? By other realms of Torah, by other realms of Halachot, it's an absolute halacha we have to fit the examples into. However, speech is dynamic and is often subject to the perception and interpretation of both the speaker and the listener. The same statement may be considered praise when said about one person, while it is pure Lashon Hara if said about someone else. The Chaim brings several examples of this phenomenon and adds that while it is impossible to list each specific case and scenario, a person should constantly keep the words of the Rambam in mind as his guide. We said this Rambam in the beginning. Any statement which, if known, could bring upon the subject physical or financial harm, or cause him distress or fear, is included in Lashon Hara. So that's the Rambam's principle. It's important to always have that in mind. And now, for the next minute or so, we'll bring different examples that the Chafetz Chaim brings in these for this category. Examples. Number 1, in area of Limud Torah, to report that a man studies Torah for 3 or 4 hours a day. Okay, why does this depend on the situation? If the subject is a kolel man who is supported by the community to learn Torah all day long, this statement is very negative. If the subject is a working man who spends most of his day in business and at work, yet he fits several hours of learning into his busy schedule, then the statement is a tremendous praise. One line, he learns 3 hours, 4 hours, it depends on the situation. Kolel Avrech, it's a big Lashon Hara. As someone who works for his parnasa, it's a huge praise. Example number 2 in the area of mitzvot. To say a person that spends a certain, not very large amount of money on kavod Shabbat, like fine foods, having guests, different ideas that we know is a mitzvah. If he is not well off, and he stretches above his means, above his meager budget, to give a proper respect to Shabbat, this is the most praiseworthy report. However, if he's a wealthy individual who can afford much more, this statement could easily be qualified as Lashon Hara. Tzedakah is very similar. A financial contribution may be considered generous by one person's standards, while for a person of means, the tzedakah will be considered very little. So again, it's relative depending on the subject, depending on who, what, where, and when. And third and final example for today, in the realm of Ben Adam Lechavero, to relate how a person treats his employees. For a regular person, certain practices or behaviors may be acceptable, while if the employer is a respectful and dignified individual, more is expected of him, and the same behavior may be viewed as improper. So the Chafetz Chaim brings these 3 examples, and there's many, many more, where a statement is relative to the subject. It could be either a praise or a huge genai, a huge disgrace, and depending on the individual, it's either Lashon Hara or you're saying something very, very nice, and that's why the Chafetz Chaim starts off this category with explaining that it's all relative. Chazak, Baruch, and Shabbat Shalom.